There are two types of people in this world. People who dress nice when they wake up, and people who just throw something on for the fun of it. Now, if you just threw something on this morning, that's a-okay. We all have those mornings. Now, if you put thought into your outfit this morning, I want you to stand up. Look at how confident all of these people look. You can sit down now. Clothing is powerful, and it can affect us in so many ways. Let me show you how some fashion matters. For instance, fashion can affect your emotions, but not only yours, it can also affect others and people around you. Fashion can also change over time, and how it has changed over time can affect how those women have acted over time. Next, fashion is a political statement, and because of the political statement that it's making, it has changed the world in so many ways we couldn't believe. Now, if you look at this color to emotion chart, you are able to see how each color is linked to another emotion. And this also relates to clothing. How a different color of clothing that you're wearing can affect how you might be feeling. For instance, if you're wearing red, you might feel anger. If you're wearing blue, you might feel sadness or depression. And if you're wearing black, you might feel absorbed or sad again. The same goes with the style of clothing you're wearing. For instance, if you're wearing a sweatshirt and sweatpants, you might feel more absorbed in your body and you don't want to make a big statement. But if you're wearing tighter clothing and more colorful, you might want to make a statement and show that you're there and people need to look at you. Now, there is a study done by a place called The Medium. They did a test where they had one group where they thought was a painter's coat and one group where they thought was a doctor's coat. This is called enclothed cognition. During this test, they had the groups wear two coats, but in reality they were the same coat. But the group that was wearing what they thought was the doctor's coat performed better in all the tests. Now, you're probably wondering how this relates to my topic. Like I said, the style of clothing that you're wearing can affect how you act. For instance, since the group that was wearing the doctor's coat, they performed better in all the tests, they felt that they embodied a different type of person. Again, that's called enclothed cognition. Now, let's get into how fashion has changed over time and how it has affected someone each time. In the 1800s, women would wear tight corsets and big gowns to show that they wanted to please the other gender. But they didn't know exactly how to make a change in the world, and they were still trying to figure that out, but they didn't know yet. Next to the early 1900s, by this time, women were realizing that they needed to make a change. They wore tighter dresses, but they weren't as big. They weren't as tight as you might think. By this time, women knew that they needed to make a change. The late 1900s. By this time, women had the right to vote. Women were no longer wearing total dresses. They would maybe wear tighter shirts and maybe flowy skirts. And women knew that they could rule the world. Next up, the early 2000s. There are so many styles that define the early 2000s. They would maybe wear bell-bottom jeans, skirts, layered shirts, chunky belts. Their style was everywhere. Now present day. Like I said, it's similar to the early 2000s. There are so many styles to define present day that I can't just say one because we may wear stuff from the early 2000s or the late 1900s. So I can't just say we wear this specific type of clothing. By now, with the present day, women know that they can rule the world, and they are starting to rule the world. Let's get into the women's marches, and let me explain to you why I'm talking about the women's marches. These marches have affected the world in so many ways we could not even believe it. Like, imagine if the women's suffrage movement never happened. How would our world be different? Now, in the mid-1700s, there was a woman, and she wanted to sway a political party vote. How did she do this, you might ask? She did this by wearing a tight corset and a big dress, kind of similar to the picture I showed you in the 1800s. She swayed the political vote, and her party won. And she did this by how she dressed. Next up, the flappers. This happened in the 1910s to the 1920s. And these women would wear short dresses and bobbed hair, and they knew that they needed to start making a change in fashion and how women were treated. So they knew we needed to start making change. So by what they wore and the hair that they had, people saw them and they stood out. And people were thinking, wow, the world needs to change. Next, the women's suffrage movement. Suffragists would wear big dresses and tight corsets, again, to show that they were there and they needed to make a change. They also held signs that can also be used as a part of your outfit because it's showing you and it's making a change. These signs also made a big change in women and how women were treated. Next, the pink hats. These hats were a sign of female solidarity and collective action. By wearing these pink hats, there were thousands of people wearing them. The government started to see them, and they saw that the decisions that they were making needed to change. And by what they wore and what they did, those changes did happen. Now, these women have impacted our world in so many ways you wouldn't even believe it. When you wake up tomorrow morning, I want you to think about what you're going to wear, how it will affect you, others, and your emotions. Thank you.